It's simple, really. Great stories with a good cup of tea. It's the Tea with Mike show. From Iranian Revolution to shooting A-list celebrities, welcome to the latest episode of the Tea with Mike show with Ali G. Grab a cup of tea, sit back, and enjoy. Alright guys, welcome to another episode of the Tea with Mike show. Joining me for this one is Ali. Welcome to Tea with Mike, Ali.
Thank you very much. Good. Hello from Hong Kong to everybody. I've got my tea ready here, and I see you have a more colorful cup. So I just try to get something to match my shirt. You know, I'm very simple that way.
Nice. Awesome. So let's just jump right into the show. Do you want to start by telling everyone a little bit about you?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Ali Ghorbani. I go by Ali G, the real one, not the guy named Sasha, the comedian. But I'm a professional photographer. I currently live in Hong Kong. I moved here approximately 19 years ago. And I work with people, events, and I also do weddings. So weddings is a big part of my business. And most of my photography, I would say 90% of it is people-based. Very little of it is product-based. And that's kind of what I do.
Awesome, man. So let's kind of start at the beginning. Do you want to tell everybody, just touch on how you living in Iran, and then there was the Iranian Revolution in 1979, and then kind of what that meant for you and your family?
Sure. So I'm originally Persian or from Iran. If you guys know a little bit of history, Persia used to be an empire, actually. And so we have, a huge and colorful history, from poetry to art to music, mathematics. Iran was part of the actual Silk Road. So we have a lot of trade experience, lots of trade with different countries from India to China. So we've actually, taken a lot of cultural things from the different cultures that we crossed, and they also came through us, right? So we had a revolution where we had a king who was deposed, and then a new regime came. And after the revolution, there was a war, Iran and Iraq. So at that time, my family actually left, and we first moved to England. After a few months in England, we went to France, and eventually we made it to the US, where we could actually, build our new life there. So that's a little bit of my journey. It was about a 2-year journey going from Iran to the United States.
That's crazy, because just touching how multiple countries, and then getting a little snippet and a little glimpse of each of those cultures before arriving at the final destination.
Absolutely. And one of the things which I still actually remember quite vividly is, we used to have, of course, during the war, there would always be aerial attacks, right? I used to live in the capital, Tehran. So, we would actually hear the sirens going off, which was the alarm for us to go into the bomb shelter. So we would pick we had a little kit, which was radio, water, flashlight, and blanket, and we would run into the bomb shelter, and then we would listen to the radio, wait for the green signal. The green signal meant that the space was actually safe now, and we could go back into, our home. But through that whole time, when the city is just blanketed, dark, all the electricity is off, everything, you can hear the anti-aircraft missiles from the top of buildings trying to hit the Iraqi airplanes, right? And this is something that I would never wish on any other person, especially children, to go through, right? But when you're going through these kind of experiences, I believe it also builds character, right? Because when you're talking about, I lived through a war and a revolution, so a little bit of economic downturn or a virus, I can work through that, right? So
yes.
It's a pretty tough background.
And the final thing on this before we can move on, do you remember the longest time that you were stuck in the bunker?
I would say probably about an hour to hour and a half. Yeah.
So,
and the thing is, it would also happen in the daytime, right? Because obviously when it's war, it's unpredictable, right? So I remember during the daytime, what would happen is they would hit the sirens, and we would come out of school, right? And we would step outside, almost like when you have an earthquake, right? Because they don't want, if the bomb hits nearby and the school starts to collapse or buildings start to collapse, they don't want people to be inside. So we would actually come outside of the school and be in the yard, wait for everything to pass.
Oh wow. Uh, it's from that story, it sounds like, of course, you never wish it on anyone, but I'm sure you can still vividly hear some of the sounds to this day and picture the environment and how scary it is.
Absolutely. I grew up, during the revolution, I used to actually see the revolution happening. So I watched it live happening. You could see burning tanks in the streets. You could see all the demonstrations. And then during the war, of course, the news the whole time is just covering the war, right? How many, of the enemy were killed today and how many airplanes were shot down and all that kind of stuff. So you're surrounded by these things. And then when you watch the TV, they would also show a lot of, kind of war movies where, the underdogs, would win, against the German fighting, machine and all that kind of stuff, just to get people's morale up that, hey, we can do this and we can win this war, right?
Wow, that's crazy. And then so by the time you reached age 12, you've already had a lot of life experience and built up a lot of character. And at age 12, you started your first business. So how did that come about? And did anyone influence you to start that business?
Okay, so great question, actually. So at that time, we were living in France, and every day to go to school, I used to walk through this little, bamboo forest. And, as a kid, right, I cut up one and I used it as a walking stick, like you see in the movies and stuff, just to have something, right? You want to twirl it, you want to walk with it, just to have something. Because back then, there was no, mobile phones and, electronic games and all that kind of stuff. So you kind of had to do with what you could find, right? And then one day when I was walking back to home, one of the neighbors, it was this elderly lady, and she said, "Hey, where'd you get that stick? Are you selling? Can you get me some more of these sticks?" And I said, "Well, what do you need it for?" She said, "Well, I have a whole bunch of plants on my balcony, and they're all kind of falling over. So I'm looking for this kind of sticks so that I can actually, put them up so they can actually grow nice." I said, "Sure, I can get them for you. 5 francs each." At the time, it was approximately 10 francs to the US dollar. So I was, so I was charging 50 cents a bamboo stick. And she was like, I'll take, 10 sticks. So I started going to the little bamboo forest and I started cutting down the forest, right? And I would, take the leaves off, make it look nice, nice and polished, right? And I started to sell to her. And then her neighbor saw, right? And they were like, "Hey, where'd you get these sticks?" She said, "Well, I got it from this kid, named Ali. Maybe you can, ask him." So I started supplying the whole building with bamboo sticks. Everyone's plants looked amazing. So, so I added value to them. And at the same time, I made money. So I used that money. If you remember, during that time, we used to have these sports catalogs. Well, you're very young, so maybe you don't remember. It was these catalogs when it had, for example, the European football championships, right? And they would have all the teams, and the brand, I think, was called Panini, right, or something, right? Right. And then you would buy the stickers and you would put it there, and then with your friends you would trade, right? So that was my way to have my own money to go buy stickers and start a little trading, with friends. So then I learned a little bit of, of the art of trading, like, which card is more valuable than the other one. So I'll give you one of mine, but I want 3 of yours, right? A little bit of negotiation. So it was all about doing, actually, right? At that point, I didn't have much reference point, but I do know that some of it was in my blood, because my grandfather was in the Persian rug business. That's RUG, not DRUG, right? Right? So he was in the Persian rug business, and I think some of that blood is instilled in you, right? So, and of course, again, being from the culture where we are used to doing so much trading and so on and so forth. So that became my first business ever at the age of 12. Was supplying the building with bamboo sticks, and everyone's plants looked awesome, and yeah, that was the beginning.
That's awesome. So how long did you kind of end up doing this business for? Was it just a summer or a year or two?
Well, we only lived in France for about a year and a half, and then we moved to the United States. Okay, so when I moved to the U.S., I was around approximately 13, more or less, right?
Yeah.
And then start to go to school there. I didn't have much business yet, but when we were applying for our green card, right, residency for the U.S.,
Yeah.
the U.S. government said, okay, once your turn comes, you need to do an interview for the green card. And the interview for the green card had just happened to be actually in Berlin, which at the time was West Berlin. So this was November of 1989, and this was the fall of the Berlin Wall. So my uncle gave me a camera, 35 millimeter film camera, and
Cool.
he said, this is a historic moment. Make sure you take lots of photos when you go. So of course I knew nothing about photography. I had seen plenty of images. Part of my inspiration actually came from Charlie Chaplin movies, because if you remember, they were all silent, right? So there was no dialogue. It was all silent, and that showed me the power of moving pictures and also still pictures, right? Because when you're growing up looking at photos and looking at silent movies, you're kind of putting the things together. You start seeing how the story develops, right, through a series of images. So when we got to Berlin, I was just overwhelmed. I was just blown away, right? This is the fall of the Berlin Wall, the basically, the end of the Cold War, if you want to call it, and the fall of the Soviet Union, right? The USSR, the Soviet bloc. So I started concentrating on the people, the emotions, and the details, right? Because there was, fireworks, there was music, there were people crying, there were people, there were people kissing the wall, there were people breaking the wall, there were holes in the wall, and people were taking photos through the holes of the East German guards on the other side. They were posing like football team members, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's film, so it's not digital, right? You can't see what you're shooting, right? So it's not like I take a photo and be like, oh, let me just adjust it. So I had to take a whole bunch of photos, which most of them didn't come out good anyway, because I had no idea of exposure and all that kind of stuff. But eventually, that's formed a foundation of what is my photography today, which a lot of it is people-based, right?
Awesome. And then, you've just every part of your life is like its own mini story that helps build to the next one.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So that's pretty cool. So that's talking a little bit how you got started in photography, and then one of your interests early on in your career was electrical engineering. So what kind of interested you about this subject area, and why did you decide to go to university?
Okay, very good question. So I had always, been fascinated with things, electrical, mechanical, right? Again, as a kid, where you don't grow up on the age of internet, right? Back then there was no internet. Internet would happen to me when I was like in university, right? And so you start to kind of you notice more, you observe more of the world around you, right? And you try to look at things and how things work, right? How a TV works and so on and so forth, right? And that always piqued my interest. So I've always been fascinated with mechanical things, electrical things, and I asked early on, to my dad, and I said, how do I learn more about this? He said, well, this is kind of what engineers do, right? So I was like, oh, okay, engineering, okay, that sounds good. So I took a little bit more, a little more research on engineering, and said, well, this is pretty cool. I can kind of find out and learn about how things work, how things are built. And I said, oh, engineering is good. I also had an interest in cooking because I love to eat, right? But when I was thinking to go to university, I looked at it purely as a financial decision, right? And I was like, okay, do I really want to bust my ass for so long as a dishwasher and then a sous chef and eventually maybe a chef, or do I want to go into engineering where the starting salary was much higher, right? At the time when I went into engineering, the starting salary was around 40 to 45,000 US dollars per year, which as a college graduate is fantastic, right?
Yes.
So I said, you know what? Let's put our time and go into engineering. So I really worked hard on my science and my math, which is the main things which are needed for engineering. And I ended up getting a scholarship to Clemson University in South Carolina. And I went there to study engineering. So I had a 4-year scholarship, and my final year, I was out of money. But one of my dreams ever since I was 6, since I had started playing football, right, or and as the Americans call it, soccer, right?
Yeah, I'm familiar with football still.
Exactly. So one of my dreams was actually to play football and to go to Brazil. Okay, so
cool.
my final year in a university, I created this relationship between my university and one of the top engineering schools in Brazil to go as an exchange student. However, I was the pioneer. I created the relationship. So what happened was I went from my university, but nobody was coming yet from the other university. I was the first person to create this relationship.
That's so cool.
So that year, I got to fulfill another lifelong dream, which was to go to Brazil and to play football there. I trained the whole summer before that to get in shape because I knew that if I was going to go to Brazil, I couldn't, muck around, right? So I worked to get in shape on my football skills, on everything, right? And it just so happened that the summer before I went to Brazil, it was the 1996 Olympic Games. And one of my dreams also was to partake in a major sporting event internationally. By partake means just to participate, right? I don't have to be an athlete. I just want to be there. I just want to experience this world stage, right? So I spent the few months before that applying for and getting accepted into the role of sports information supervisor for soccer, stationed in the Olympic Village. And I got the job in Atlanta. So the month before going to Brazil as an exchange student, I was in Atlanta and I worked in this role. The role was purely voluntary, and Gary Vee says, you got to eat dirt, right? So I found a college professor of mine who had an extra room in her home in Atlanta because I wasn't living in Atlanta. I wasn't from Atlanta. And she said, you know what, I will house you. I said, you know what? God bless you. Thank you so much. So now I had a place to stay for a month because imagine trying to pay hotel and all that kind of stuff, right? So I used to help her. So I used to help her with all the house chores and whatever I could, right? Just to repay her a little bit. And every day I would go to the Olympic Village because every day was a new adventure. And I eventually got to meet the Brazilian football team. So the original Ronaldo. I will actually email you the photo. You can show it to put it here. I used to have hair. I used to have a big afro. So I met the original. I missed the original Ronaldo, Juninho, Bebeto, Roberto Carlos. I met all these, and I took photos with them. Right. So these photos I printed out. I made into an album, and I carried that album with me when I went to Brazil. So when I went to Brazil, the first thing I did was I went to look for people to play football with because that was my dream. I was like, I'm now in Brazil. This is the Holy Land, the Holy Grail. I'm gonna go play football. So I went to there's pickup games all the time everywhere. Just like
on the streets,
Exactly. So I went and I made some friends eventually. They invited me to play because they have like these pickup games, right? Where there's like 5-on-5 or 7-on-7, and then it's 10 minutes or 2 goals. Right. So what happens is if they need an extra player, I was like, hey guys, I'm volunteering. If you guys need extra players, so they're like, okay, let's put the gringo in and let's see what happens. So and like I said, I had worked hard the summer before. Even during the Olympics, I used to train a lot, and I was in shape. So I went in and scored a couple of goals. I got their attention. So they're like, who's this guy? So they started talking to me, and I was like, yeah, I'm Ali from Iran. They were like, Iran? We've never met anybody from Iran. Tell us about your culture. Tell us about, the food you eat. We know you guys play, a lot of soccer. We've seen it on TV. And so what I did was I brought out this photo album, right? I was like, I'm a big fan of Brazil. Here are my photos, right? And, when they say a picture speaks, 1,000 words, that time it really made an impact for me, and I could really see the power of photography because I didn't have to say anything. Here is me standing in front of them, and here's me, a photo of me with one of their national team heroes, Ronaldo. Okay. And that year, to my benefit or whatever you want to call it, that year Ronaldo won the FIFA Player of the Year award. Okay, in 1996. So he became a global megastar. So everybody knew him, not just Brazil, everybody knew him, right? So these photos became like gold for me. So every party I used to go to, I used to carry the damn album as well. And that was my way of making friends because I couldn't really speak Portuguese. I was just learning, right? But again, these photos led into my conversation with people. And then we started making friends like at Domino's, right? Because they were like, hey guys, come over here, look at this guy, da 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 da, right? So that year was extremely influential on my life. It showed me the power of photography because again, there was no social media back then, right? There was no Facebook, there was no Instagram, there was none of that kind of stuff, right? Everything was actually in person, right? Even mobile phones. I remember some friends used to have beepers, right? so even my dorm when I used to live in Brazil, there was no phone there. I had to go to the public phone to call friends. I was like, hey guys, can you pick me up like in 1 hour in front of the whatever, the burger place or whatever. And then I had to hope that, in 1 hour they're gonna show up, right? So that's a little bit, sorry, I got carried away with the excitement because when I got to talk about Brazil and stuff, I get carried away. But that's a little bit of story of leading into Brazil. And oh, by the way, I did join the university team.
Okay.
They accepted me as a guest, and I played with them, and that was to me, I fulfilled a lifelong dream where I got to play football with Brazilians in Brazil. So at that time, I was 22, going on 23. Right? And I was like, okay, you know what? I've just fulfilled one of my life's, biggest dreams. So now it's time to set the next dreams in motion.
Oh, wow. Okay. 20. Nice. So really enjoying the conversation so far. So let's have a little pause.
Yeah.
So I know you love drinking tea. So what's your favorite type of tea?
Oh, very good question. So the tea that I'm drinking today, I come from a tea culture, right? So Iran is very, very much into tea. And now I live in Hong Kong, which is, again, a huge tea culture. So the tea that I'm actually drinking today, it's a blend. And I brought the jar. So this blend was actually made by my mom. And it's a combination of teas from Iran and also including Darjeeling and some of the other teas. So what we do is when we make this kind of mixture of tea, we add things for different reasons. One we add for the aroma, okay? The other one we add for the taste, right? And then the other one we add a little bit for the color and the health benefits. Okay, so this is a mixture of all those. So what we do for this is we actually pour the tea into water which is not boiling because you don't want to overdo it, obviously, right?
Right.
And then we let it brew. So that brewing process brings a lot, of the flavors and the colors out, right? And I don't know if you're a purist. It doesn't matter if you are or not. But I like to drink this kind of tea without any added things. However, in Iran, we love to have it with sugar cubes. So we drink it hot. In fact, when you have the tea and you have the little tea saucer, and we love to drink the tea hot. So what we do is we take a sugar cube, we put it in front of our mouth, we pour the tea in the little saucer, and it's still steaming hot, and we drink it from the saucer.
Oh, wow.
So that tea goes through the sugar cube and gets sweetened as it goes down. Okay. Right now, however, I'm trying to cut down on sugar so I can go back to my modeling life. So I'm not having it with sugar. I'm having it pure as a tea. But that's a little bit of the tea that I like to have at home. Of course, being in Hong Kong, we have huge access to tea from all over the world, including China. One of my favorites is the flower tea. I don't know if you've seen it or heard of it. So they take the flowers and they compress it so it becomes a little ball. In fact, I should send you a pack when I go out. I'll get you a pack and I'll send you. So this ball, you put it into a huge cup or a flask, which is kind of like a little fish bowl, let's say, right? A big one.
Yeah.
And then when you put the hot water, it opens up and the flower comes out. Okay.
Wow.
So it's amazing, especially if you have guests and you want to impress them, you say, well, this is tea I made for you. You can drink it, but it also looks amazing. So especially now, it's very Instagrammable. So so that'll be definitely a hit when you have guests over to even your place.
Oh, awesome. So
Tell me about a fun fact of tea, because I know you're huge. In fact, that's how you get the name Tea with Mike.
sure, man. But before I tell you that, just touching off the sugar lumps in tea. When I was a lot younger, I used to spend a lot of time with my grandparents.
Okay.
And one of the favorite things we used to do after we'd been for like a long walk in the countryside is we go to like a local cafe, very picturesque, and they used to have tea, and then you could get sugar lumps and you could put them in your tea, and then like also mints and like afternoon tea basically. So so that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then the tea fact for the episode is, here we go. The word tea comes from the Chinese T apostrophe E, which was the word in the Amoy dialect for the plant from which tea leaves came. In Mandarin, the word was CH apostrophe A, which is where the words cha and chai are derived from, and that comes from foodnetwork.com.
Yes, exactly. Very good. Yes, here we say cha. In fact, when we go for dim sum, right? You've heard of the Chinese dim sum, which is like let's say the Chinese version of tapas, right? Where you have small dishes. The dim sum in Cantonese is called yum cha, which means to drink tea. It's not, hey, let's go have tapas. It's yum cha, to drink tea. So it goes exactly with what you just said. Yes.
Also, what a great tea fact for this episode. Cool. And then, so this is a great spot for you if you want to talk a little bit about this calendar that you've created for charity kind of during the pandemic.
Okay. Yes. So what happened was, my photography when I came to Hong Kong actually as an engineer. So I studied engineering. I started working as an engineer, and then that job sent me to Hong Kong, right? So that job sent me to Hong Kong, and then after a year and a half, I resigned from engineering, and I was like, what should I do? What can I do? I came across this gentleman. His name is Rene. He and I we're like family, and also his wonderful wife and the rest of his family. And I started a small trading company, and this trading company we started trading chicken feet. Okay, so I was selling chicken feet from Brazil, which was, again, I had this history, so again comes back to Brazil, right? I was selling chicken feet from Brazil to China. So China has this insatiable appetite for chicken parts, for beef parts, cow parts, and so on, and they don't produce and they don't produce enough. So we started to fill this void, right? And this, again, going back to being an entrepreneur and hustling and doing whatever it takes, because I didn't really care what I'm trading, as long as it was it did no harm, it was not illegal, right? And it was business. So people say, well, how did you think of chicken feet? Well, there was demand, right? And there was countries that were throwing it away, so you kind of put the things together. So that business grew, but then we hit financial crisis, and when we hit financial crisis, I asked myself, what is the legacy I want to leave behind, right? When one day I'm no longer here. And I said, well, it's not chicken feet, and I'm no longer an engineer, right? So what if I go back to my old passion, which is photography? And what happened was, I bought my first DSLR, which I've got it over here in the back, behind me, right? And I started in the nightclubs of Hong Kong, start taking photos of DJs and drunk people at 3 a.m, right? Again, eating dirt, right? Working for almost nothing. When I started to build my name, started to build my brand, I got noticed by some of the shareholders of the nightclub. They started hiring me for their private events. I got noticed by some of the brands. So I started shooting for MHD, which is Moët Hennessy Diageo, is part of LVMH Group. So I started shooting for Dom Perignon, Krug, Belvedere. I shot the entire James Bond series when the movie opened up in Hong Kong. Okay, they did events with like Aston Martin. They did events with the watch company, right? The watch that James Bond was wearing. I forgot which brand it was now, and so I shot those. I got into red carpet celebrity events because some of them were also sponsored by Moët Chandon, right? So I got to photograph, Keanu Reeves. Got to photograph Tilda Swinton, Mariah Carey. I've photographed Robert De Niro, Leonardo DiCaprio, and so on and so forth. Now, what happened was, while I was doing that, I started to create also my passion project on the side, right? The passion project is what doesn't pay you, but it fulfills you, right, in your heart, right? And what can you do for your community? Because I always believe that the community you take from, you should always also give back, right? This is part of the cycle, right? If you only take, then eventually life will take away from you as well, right? But if you take and you give back, that goes back into the world, right? Like how we met, right? We met through Twitter, right? So this was the world giving back to me, the world giving back to you, because you create so much good content, you're giving to the world, right? So that's kind of how we came across each other, right?
Yeah, I think it's a win-win because this is a storytelling show, and you've got so many like fantastic stories, and with all these stories comes a certain pedigree.
Thank you. So going back to your original question about the calendar. So one of my big passions, was photographing artists. I was always fascinated, by dancers and so on and so forth. One of the photographers I always look up to is Joe McNally, right? He does amazing work with lighting, with ballerinas and so on. So I started doing photos on the side. I started contacting, artists and dancers, people I knew, people I didn't know. And as I started to build the portfolio, my portfolio got stronger, so I could approach people who were much more professional. So I started approaching people from Cirque du Soleil because, in 1 hour from Hong Kong, there's a territory called Macau. It's also part of China. And in Macau, there is a show called The House of Dancing Water, which was started by Franco Dragón, the founder of Cirque du Soleil. So I started contacting some of those, dancers who are amazing, amazing athletes. And through, my passion and their skill work, I started to create a body of work. And this body of work, I turned it into a charity calendar. Now, why?
Just move the calendar like over to the right. There you go.
Okay.
There you go.
So this is the cover, right? This is Danielle on the cover, and then I self-produced the calendar. So I went out and I found sponsors. So here, if you look on the bottom, I've put the logos, including my own, right? Yeah. And I've got the sponsors. So I gave each sponsor a full page in the calendar.
Oh wow!
Right, and of course then. So this is one of the more sponsors because the printing costs money, the calendar design costs money. I didn't charge for my time, and the artist didn't either. So then this is how the calendar kind of started going on, right? Again, so I started producing this. I started approaching different artists, right? Through this, I found a lighting sponsor, which has now named me on their professional photographer ambassador program. The lighting company is called Photix. So I love these guys. They provide me lighting for all of my work, including today for your show. Why I have decent lighting. It's not coming from the computer screen. It's coming from this light that I have there above. So anyway. So this is Heather here in this photo. So I started putting these things together, and I created a charity calendar for 3 years in a row, and I dedicated this calendar to an organization called Women Helping Women Hong Kong. Okay, so this became part of my branding and also became something that I could give back to the community. So I printed approximately 800 copies of this calendar. And every year they would have a charity fundraising gala, which they would have, 300 to 350 of the top socialites, let's say in Hong Kong, right, at the gala. So because I would contribute to the charity through photography donation packages, I would also sponsor their event photography. And I made this. I got to put this calendar in the goodie bags of all 300 to 350.
Wow.
So this became part of my branding. Imagine every day people looking at my brand and my photos for a year, right? So even though we say, that print is dead and all that kind of stuff, there's a lot of truth into it. Digital obviously overtakes it. However, this was great for me, for people who are, have an office, they have a home, and they want something nice, because became art, right? So I did
Yes.
I did it for 3 years in a row. I got amazing feedback, and of course, my business grew tremendously as a result of it, because when people thought of a photographer, like, oh, that guy Ali G, he did some awesome work. I've seen his logo. Even people I never met before, when I would give them my business card at an event, they say, oh, I recognize your logo. Somebody gifted me your calendar.
It's the Tea with Mike show.